a quick introduction of the people in the panel. We start with Sasha Rai Gupta, who is Global Head Strategy and Digital, Strategic Sourcing and Procurement from Bristol Myers Squibb, which is a pharma company. Sasha is based in New Jersey, so she's actually it's early days for her. Thanks a lot for joining us, Sashi. Then we have Julio Peronceli, Global Director, Insights and Analytics, Cycles and Procurement from Danone, joining us from the Netherlands. And then we have Jörg Erlenmeyer, who is New Capability Launch Director at McKinsey & Company. And Jörg has a background with Nokia for many years. So we're going to talk about advanced analytics in procurement. My own background is actually also in procurement. I used to work for Procter & Gamble, and I was head of digital procurement there for the last 5 years or so. And since I've left them, I basically started a new business called Digital Procurement Now, and we focus on helping companies be more successful in the digital procurement transformations. And analytics is often a very good place to start, right? I mean, if you don't know what you're buying or who you're buying it from, then of course, those are often areas of opportunity. So the first questions I have, maybe starting with you, Sashi, why did you decide to invest in advanced analytics in procurement?
Sure. So to put it across in a very simplistic manner, right? All of us, I think majority of us as procurement organizations have gone through multiple rounds of transformations, multiple iterations, and we're steadily climbing up the maturity curve. And the beauty of it is that both the businesses and in fact, even the suppliers have visions of us as value drivers, right? And I think analytics definitely is a very key enabler for us to not only meet and rise those expectations, but shift the narrative entirely, right? And when we talk about the value that analytics can provide, what we are looking at are intelligence capabilities across the spectrum, and the things that if you look at, I primarily look at three buckets, which is around, okay, how do you look at opportunity intelligence? How do you get to that revenue growth? How do you get to the top line growth? And again, looking at both external, internal data, multiple scenarios that you can come up with. And if you look at risk intelligence, which is very relevant to the days and we're living in right now with what all happened to the supply chain, and look at the different facets of it, right? Financial risk, cyber risk. If you look at our supply chain, if you look at sustainability and corporate social responsibility, that's another big area where analytics plays a big part. And third is around operational intelligence. And to me, that really around whatever value that you create, how do you kind of, ensure that there is not enough leakage? How do you ensure that there's cycle time after the fact view? So there's so much value that analytics drives. And the last thing I can say on that topic is we're also looking at end-to-end intelligence capabilities around category intelligence and supplier intelligence, which feeds into the three things that I spoke about. So a tremendous opportunity for us as procurement to truly be those value creators and also drive guided decision-making across the business. So, yeah.
Very good. Thank you. Thank you, Sashi. So the same question for you, Julio.
Yes, thanks, Nico. Adding on what Sachi said, for Danone, we had a bunch of reasons, from the typical ones that we don't want to be guessing, we want to know, so we need to provide our decision makers with insights, with facts. People had the feeling that they were kind of in the dark, and with analytics, we try to turn the lights on so they can see where they're operating. Another practical reason is what we saw, our buyers, our category leaders, they spend a lot of time doing a lot of things. And what we bring with this transformation is an effort to professionalize, to say, you don't need to be spending time crunching numbers in Excel and cleaning data. We'll have a specific team to do that for you, so you can focus on what you can add value as an experienced buyer or thinking your strategies. So we achieved the scale so we could create specific teams to support the rest of the organization, and one was analytics. I'd say the third reason is analytics could become a competitive advantage. So if you're able to leverage your own data specific for you in new ways, well, you can compete in the market, and you could even create new business models. So we see it as a long-term competitive advantage at Danone.
Very good. Thank you, Julio. And I love the word competitive advantage, right? Because in procurement, I think that's what we're all about, creating a competitive advantage for our companies, right? By bringing innovation in and getting the best from our suppliers. And indeed, analytics is, I think, an area where you can drive a competitive advantage. Julio, Jörg, the same question for you. Why did you decide to invest in advanced analytics in procurement?
Well, I think the key thing here, I mean, a lot has been said already, of course, by the two colleagues here, but I think the important thing really for me is transparency, first of all. And making actually, you know, I think I just want to double down actually on what Julio said on the fact-based decision making, right? There's too much actually, you know, single source or single truth actually informations around companies these days and corporations. And I think the analytics, also the advanced technologies actually like cloud and techniques and tech stacks actually, which give us insights into multiple sources of data, help us actually to move up the stack from a decision-making perspective. That's one. I think the other thing is that the complexity is growing massively. And I think it's important actually that to understand that we are moving away from single point to multi-point connections. We are moving, you know, we are moving to beyond human capability in a lot of these, you know, areas, because we need to combine data insights these days, which are beyond purely one category, for example, of, you know, supply or buying, but rather actually looking at the downstream logistics, you know, the supply chain, the manufacturing. When do you buy at what point in time? So you need to become much more real time in your efforts to also make sure that you are providing actually, you know, first of all, actually a risk mitigation to some of the topics, that you are looking into the future and not only into the past, so that you can starting become predictive and forecasting actually, you know, what is really out there, and making sure that you are getting creative as well as strategic, you know, in your dimensions of buying, supplying, and making sure that also the business outlook actually gets, you know, its fair share actually of you know, input into what I would say modern procurement should be, you know, delivering to an organizational outcome.
Okay, very good. Thank you, Jörg. So I think, you know, here are companies that have decided to invest in advanced analytics in procurement. So you guys have basically brought the data together. You basically have visualizations for the buyers and for the users around you know, spend data, maybe risk data, supplier risk data, supply chain data, maybe inventory data. I mean, there's so many pieces of data that you can combine to drive the data-based decision making. I guess that's what we're all after. So now with that in place, how do you drive the organization to adopt it and to really take advantage of that new capability? So maybe starting with Jörg again.
Well, I think the key aspect is, of course, you know, how do you change the culture in your organization, right? So adoption of the new capabilities means also you are posing a little threat actually to some of your organization. You are making you're going beyond, I would say, data sovereignty, or you know, you could also say actually the power of you know, knowledge, right? Because you're starting actually to create you know, data democracy in a sense in your organization. You are, you know, giving insights to lots more people actually, you know, in all sort of forms of the organization, if you really wish to do so, because you can cut actually those data actually, you know, trees and the information actually in such a way that all of organizations can actually really benefit from it, input into it, and also make decisions on it. So I think one is really to work actually with the capability and the culture in tandem. The second is, of course, all about actually, you know, skill upgrading. And that means also that you need to make sure actually that you are working with those people who are maybe affected by the typical stereotypes of the digital world, the analytics, the capability of robots, automation, and so forth will take away my role or my job. And I think that's not the case. We just need to move actually the humans into a much more creative and strategic actually environment of working, and making sure that we use their capabilities best and take actually those repetitive capabilities and repetitive tasks, and where it's too complex actually for humans to handle easily, and create those insights so that people can actually do something with it. And I think that will inflict, of course, quite some threat to the organization, but also pain to a certain degree, which we need to go through to really actually help the organization and the people, the individual, to really understand actually what's the journey, and how can you grow with this new world, more or less, which is evolving around you. And that's the challenge, I think, of organizational and operating model development.
Yeah. Okay. No, thank you very much. And Sashi, I see you're kind of agreeing with a lot of what Jörg just said. So, I mean, in terms of Bristol Myers Squibb, you guys have been on the journey for a while, right? So, in terms of bringing that into practice around that kind of the culture and how does the organization needs to change to take full advantage of that new capability?
Well, I agree with most of everything what Jörg was saying. It is really about the culture and the skills, right? And I really look at it in two. If you look at two buckets, typically most organizations have looked at as generators and consumers, right? Folks that generate data and insights, and people who consume it. I think what's really working for us is creating that middle layer between the generation and the consumption of data. And when you talk about the middle layer, that's where the skills that Jörg was talking about comes in, right? It's like a hub and a spoke model where, yes, you can have a central data and analytics team that keeps churning out the data, but how clued and how in they are to sort of the financial data, the process data, that particular category intelligence that somebody knows in R&D or in GPS, right? So what we're trying to create is this middle layer where you have data stewards, data champions for a particular category area. We have people who are very conversant with their requisition to order process, the invoice to pay process, and they are very familiar with the transactional fields that are there, the challenges that are there in the raw data, not just what shows up in the downstream, right? And when you have this team of people who are not only conversant with the functional domain, so whether it's that process, that function, but also are data savvy. They are data storytellers. They can use and crunch numbers. That's the beauty of it. So what we are, and accountability. I think that for us, adoption is driven by accountability. So you need to have these two groups talking to each other, which is the middle layer, where the middle layer then starts taking accountability a lot for the procurement team, saying that we will tell you what are our priorities. We will tell you what the pain areas are, and together we start solving for that one after another. And so the accountability is shared versus it being a problem for the generation only, right? And the other thing I would say what's really working well for us is our collaboration with our data teams, right? This is one thing in most organizations, you have this data lake and everybody, like sometimes procurement and the data lake teams do not necessarily have a great relationship. There's this whole thing about data democracy that we spoke about, even within our organizations. And being open to, first of all, having those conversations, really working together, not only on the normalization, but the enrichment of the data, but also being open to having external clouds of data. Like many people are very scared of doing that. Like when you look at supplier intelligence or category intelligence, you need to open up your infrastructure as IT to what's available outside. So you have a much bigger data lake, if you may, right? Which is not just internal. So I think those are the few things I would add to what Jörg said that have really working for us. Again, it's a journey for us, but it's helping us on that journey.
Yeah. Okay. No, very helpful. And I think that, data scientists and the people that basically work the data and the people that use it don't necessarily understand each other very well, right? So you create basically a data champions, people that are probably category managers, but very data savvy. and they guide then the central team around these are the type of dashboards that would really make a difference, like historic pricing, or combining supplier performance data with commercial data, etc., etc. So okay, I think that's a very, very interesting insight, Sashi. So I mean, for you as well, Danone, Julio, you've been on a journey as well when it comes to spend analytics. And so for you, the same question, right? What are the implications to the organization? And is that something, is it something that everybody should learn and have access to, or this is kind of more for like a small group of technical people?
It's for everybody, but in different degrees, right? So you have the hardcore team that is doing the algorithms, the dashboarding, getting their hands dirty with the data, but then you have different layers of data savviness and all the way to data citizenship. I would like to stress a couple of points. So I like very much Shashi saying you need to think about data stewards, data owners, data quality. This is maturity. This means you don't only get to play with data, you also have responsibilities. So you need to take care of it, right? So it's not only rights, it's responsibilities. And it's right there. I like also you're talking about culture. What we are doing is changing the culture, which is very painful. It doesn't go as fast as we like. In there, I have a couple of tips that work very well for us. So of course, everybody wants top-down support, big investments by the CEO, by the board, of course. But also bottom-up is really good. What we do is we find those early adopters for analytics. So you will always have in your organization people that have two characteristics. They're always open to find solutions to do their work, to improve their work, to perform better. They're always curious, and they are not scared of technology. So with these people, we found 2, 3, 4 of them to launch the first projects because they embrace it. They go for it. They think along with you. So they help you with those early victories, early wins. And from that, you can start getting a bit of snowball effect with the rest of colleagues, right? I would stress also a role of analytics translator. So we're actually having full-time positions for analytics translators that take by the hand the business, they take by the hand the categories, the buyers, listen to them, understand their needs, their challenges, their ambitions, and turn that into dashboards, algorithms, trainings, whatever they need, right? Always in the area of analytics. So I think those analytics translators to guide the business are very important, and we are giving a lot of weight on those roles in the organization. Of course, we also mentioned skills, so that is almost for granted that you also need to work on upskilling your workforce. Last one that I want to mention on culture is there is a mindset change. Is with analytics, you need to step a bit away from the fact that every project needs to succeed. You need to get it right, because our traditional IT projects are very well thought out, very scoped, with clear specs, and a waterfall approach. With analytics, machine learning, data science, you need to try to see if it works. And that means you need to throw enough balls in the air and some will land okay. And that's also a change, right? Because you start a project and you need to be comfortable with it failing quickly and cheaply so you can move on to the next one. But by doing so, you'll hit those home runs. And that's also a mindset change. That is more characteristic in technology companies, and it will also come for procurement professionals.
Yeah.
Very good, Julio. So thanks a lot for that, right? I think this adoption or finding people that running with this technology and then can basically show the others how it's done. We always say 15% adoption is it's hard to get to 15%. When you're at 15%, the rest will follow because they basically see others do it and they feel they're left behind if they're not kind of proficient in the platform and can really use the data as well as the others. And I like to talk a little bit more about the skills, right? And it's been mentioned a few times. Do you think we should kind of hire different people in procurement because of advanced analytics and the amount of data that's available to buyers to make decisions, and not just in I mean, we talked about supplier risk, cyber risk, supply chain risk. I mean, you look at all the data that's available. Do you think we should start hiring different people in procurement? And maybe Jörg, that's one for you to.
No, I think that's a super interesting question, because I think there is a dual approach actually to this, right? I mean, you need to upskill your own organization to the degree it's possible, but I believe actually that there are certain profiles out there which you usually don't have inside organizations, like, for example, everything around data science, data analytics, etc. And the trend I'm seeing is that more and more actually corporations, of course, go into this kind of domain, which also shows actually, when you try to get those, profiles, they are very hard to come by these days. It's a bit more difficult actually than you would think, right? Because the supply and demand, of course, is not balanced yet. What we will see, I think, is a much larger actually degree of skills and competences in that area, and they are necessary. But again, this is complementary, right? Because ultimately, what you will have is capabilities actually around, the domain categories, the buyers, I mean, and the impacts they can create, right? Because it is one thing actually about generating more or less actually, the work you're doing, the heavy lifting more or less to generate those insights, which is one thing. And then the next step needs to be, of course, capturing that value out of those insights and translating it into impact. And that again needs actually the right decision making. It needs the right skills. It needs to have organizations which are going to the suppliers, changing contracts, changing frame agreements, changing supplier bases. And that, I think, needs a very different breed, actually, of procurement people. They need to become much more creative. It will be much more flexible teams across, boundaries. Usually, actually, in the stiff, rigid organizations, it was very much, segmented. But I think that becomes fluid. So you need to actually, build more or less flexible teams out of different domains to come to the right outcomes and translate actually this into the right, decision making, right? And then the other thing, when I'm mentioning decision making, I just want to highlight it is, of course, when you go to a fact-based, decision making process inside the organization, it needs to be actually, top-down driven. You need to convince your board and your executives actually to not think of their experience or listen actually to what others are saying, but rather actually looking at the facts. And I think this creates a very different kind of opportunity also for those decision makers to really actually go about it and turn actually their own rhythm of decision making upside down, because they will be more involved in strategic decisions. And because you have the data democracy so deep in the organization, the decisions actually on day-to-day basis become actually more an organization. The organization will execute on those decisions, right? And will not actually bring it up the pyramid, if I may say, which also frees up time then for more strategic decision making, more strategic forward looking, actually shaping of the organization to become more competitive in the future. And I think this is where leaders should spend their time. And I think that that's a side effect actually, which is super important actually to bring even to the center of attention.
Yeah. Okay. Oh, very good. Thanks a lot, Jörg. I don't know if there's time for one more question, but I'm going to try to get it in. I mean, ERP data and all the data we have on our suppliers, etc. is kind of, that's what I call small data. Big data is what's out on the internet in terms of social media, maybe supply chain disruptions, news sentiment, financial health of suppliers, etc. I mean, in your kind of analytics journey to go into advanced analytics, how are you able to combine your own data with that external data to get to insights that kind of category managers maybe not, didn't have before you got into this journey? Is that something that you guys are working on already, and have you brought that to life?
I mean, I can give you, I love that you asked that question, right? Because it's really about the operating model that you set up, right? And when I was talking about the intelligence capability, an example I can give you is on the supplier intelligence capability that we're looking at. So, and it's like building the Lego blocks, right? So when you talk about the internal data, when you look at supplier data, you have internal foundational data around who's my supplier, like even something simple as supplier master is things that we struggle with, right? How do we get to unique data, normalize parent and child linkages and all that? And what are the different transactions we have with that supplier? Now, to your point about how do we then marry it up with the data that's outside, so the risk data for the supplier, discovering new suppliers, also looking at what's the kind of performance that they have, not just with us, but with others, right? What we are looking at in the operating model is end-to-end journey from supplier discovery, onboarding, enrichment, maintenance, and retirement. And when you look at that life cycle that a supplier has, and I know we were talking earlier, Nico, about the experience, right? The integrated experience. You want an integrated experience both for the business, the supplier, and procurement, where when a supplier is discovered all the way to it's retired, how do you have all this data and insights throughout that journey? So how we are enabling that is ensuring that we have the process coverage, so the business outcomes. How do we have the foundational data? How are we accessing the external insights? So we're working with, for example, companies like Tealbook to discover diverse data. We're working with risk providers. We're working with companies like Resilink for risk intelligence that we're bringing in as a hub for all that information. We are updating our supplier master and us, spend analytics. So it's a combination of both those ecosystems together. But at the end of the day, the point which Jorg and Julia are making, it's about decision making and guided decision making across and that's how you connect. Because people talk about APIs being the connectors for technology. Data is the biggest connector. Insights are the biggest connectors from one team to another. So I think that's how we are going towards it. And we are building these end-to-end intelligence capabilities, which look at internal as well as external for us.
Watch out there on the external data is that if you are going to supplier of risk data that in the sales pitch says, okay, we're an FMCG, the supplier says, I work with all the big FMCGs. By getting external risk data from that supplier, I'm just leveling up with the others. I'm not creating any competitive advantage because everybody has the same. So the key there is to find ways to generate external data that is specific for you. So an example is, we have a lot of farmers. What if we get satellite data, we put sensors on the fields, that generates data specific of our farms. That then it's differentiating, right? Because getting risk data, alerts, news, where there's a tsunami coming, everybody can have that. But on our farms, it's only us. So that is where you also need to dare to do things that are not the standard in the market, but that can create that competitive advantage.
Yeah. So, and Julio, I really like your focus on competitive advantage, right? And I think that's what we should be focusing on in procurement. And yeah, I fully agree that, if you have data that others don't have, you can drive a competitive advantage. Another way to drive a competitive advantage is to maybe use the data that's out there in a better way than your competitors are, right? So you're kind of, you're more quick, you're kind of aware before everybody else. There are shortages in certain markets, or there's like a disruption because some factory burned down, or you have a force majeure somewhere. So I think a lot of it is also about the data that's out there, and how do you ensure it gets to the people that manage those categories and those businesses, and they are the first then to act on it. And
exactly.
Secure supply, before others can, right? Because
you're touching something very important there, Nico. Because if you provide insights, but the decision process is slow, that doesn't matter, right? So if there's an urgency, but it takes 1 month for the steering committee to join and decide on something, then you're already too late to the party. So it's very important to not just deploy technology and analytics, but be willing to change your processes and your ways of working.
And it's got a very short shelf life, right? Every data and insights that you produce has a very short shelf life. You need to refresh it and you refresh it. One thing which I want to say in the chat, it's very busy, that the kind of skills you need when you're doing descriptive analytics, and if that's the kind of maturity you have, is very different from what you get to. And that's the point, right? So And many of us, I think what we don't realize is that you need different skill sets of people depending on which area you're at, right? So when you get to this advanced category supplier, yes, you need that ability to, okay, what's the so what? How do I do complex, data crunching and algorithm scenarios? If you do descriptive, honestly, sometimes you just need people who really know the ERP systems, know what's the configuration that has happened, and who are great collaborators. That's thing I cannot insist enough, because it will always be a challenge for procurement, IT, and other teams to work together. So if you are a great collaborator, that's the only way this can be successful.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, this panel has people from procurement, it has people from IT, right? So it shows that I think procurement analytics or advanced spend analytics is not something that IT can deliver. It's not something that procurement can deliver. It's only something that procurement and IT can deliver together, right? And I think it's a lot of that is about the collaboration between the functions. And also, I think for the technical folks to understand procurement and category management and the challenges that procurement has in terms of risk or cybersecurity or compliance, etc., as well as for kind of the category managers to understand what's possible with analytics and what's possible by combining different sets of data, especially if you go to very diverse sets of data, right? So maybe data that you think initially have nothing to do with each other, but if you can bring it together, that's very powerful, right? And so I think with that, I think we are kind of at the end of the hours. Any last minute comments from anyone here?
Well, I think I don't want to make the last comment necessarily, but I just wanted to add that I think this, it can never be underestimated actually how procurement grows, right? And like you were saying, I mean, I think it's not only about IT and procurement, it's about all the other functions as well, right? Yeah. And Shashi made it the right point. I mean, you need to collaborate, you need to build flexible teams, you need to break down, invisible or sometimes visible walls inside the organization, barriers for communication, and take away the threats of inside the organization, because only when people see actually the advantages of what this can deliver also to their own life, in a sense, in their own domain, I think it will start actually to get to a natural adoption. And I think that's super interesting and super cool to see. I mean, a great example is actually this kind of virtual session, right? I mean, you could have tried this 3 years ago. I think people would have been more resistant and hesitant actually to these kind of wonderful sessions, right? And these days we are all actually, due to a massive, of course, pandemic, forced to change our habits, right, and change our culture. And I think that is quite interesting to see. So it can be done. It just needs the right trigger points. It just needs to be pushed. And that is why I think actually everything comes down to culture ultimately.
Super. Thanks a lot. Thanks a lot, Jörg, for your. Thanks a lot, Sashi. I mean, it's great that we have very diverse perspectives here, right? So different companies, IT, procurement, and I think everybody is on a journey here. And the best is still to come. I think that's very, very clear. And thanks a lot you as well, Julio, from the Netherlands. And everyone, please enjoy the rest of the conference. And you've got our names, and if you want to catch up with any of those of us, I think we are happy to do that. So,
thank you, Nico. Thank you so
very much.
Thank you, Nico. Thanks.